Hi everyone! I got a lot of questions about the illegal 16th century Irish outfit that I wore to an SCA event recently, so I thought I'd make a short video explaining the different garments and what exactly was banned. So starting with the shift, this is meant to represent the Irish lena, or shirt, worn by both men and women of the time, the women's lena typically being much longer than the men's. It's often referred to as the saffron shirt, so named for the herb that was used to dye it. This particular lena is not dyed with saffron, as I'm still in the process of making my historically accurate version with the poofy sleeves that would put the Victorians to shame. I have a whole video up on my YouTube channel of recreating the 16th century dye recipe and dyeing the fabric to make the gown, and some more history about the lena if that's something you'd be interested in watching. Women were forbidden in 1466 from dyeing their shifts with saffron, with a fine of 6 pence for the infraction. The next garment is a simple supportive kirtle, and this garment is pretty much just vaguely European, or could be called guna, the Irish word for gown. In 1537, Henry VIII passed an act forbidding the kirtle to be decorated with any sort of ostentatious material, like silk or gold, and it could not be decorated after the Irish fashion. This trim isn't real silk, but my buddy Drix over at Callantyre Trim has an amazing and beautiful selection if you'd like to check out his website. I also lined the inside of the gown with gold fabric to solidify that cheeky nod to the ban. Anyway, the fine for this particular infraction was not stated, and it would have varied from place to place in Ireland, more intense scrutiny being imposed in Galway or Dublin. But the sumptuary laws almost always state that the garment itself will be confiscated. The last piece in this outfit is my own interpretation of the coat d'amore, or greatcoat. We have no examples, only a couple of depictions of what we think is the men's coat d'amore, and only vague descriptions of the women's. I decided to base my interpretation off of the 15th century houppelande, but modified it to include the bits of information known about the coat d'amore, like the fact that it was split down center front, and sometimes used imported silk fabric, and my still illegal decorations of gold trim. Notable other illegal activities are my hair, which was enforced to be covered by the English, but traditionally often left uncovered by unmarried women. The most illegal and expensive portion of this gown is the ban from 1539 that forbade women from tucking up their gowns into the waistband to display the colorful lining underneath. The fine for this was 20 shillings. As a McDermott myself, Macs or O's were not allowed to swagger down the street for a fine of 12 pence. While there are many more sumptuary laws that I didn't cover, one that we've seen often with occupation was the banning of the Irish language on pain of 2 pence. Well, I have a message for you, Henry VIII. Send me a bill, England.
This is history they don't teach you in school. How women's hats endangered entire bird species. And a warning, if you love birds, this video is not for you. So feathered hats have been a symbol of class and style for years, but in the 1870s through around the 1900s, they took it way too far. And in addition to getting the wildest plumage they could possibly find, they would also take literal entire birds that they would prop up with wires and springs on hats. They might use owl heads, hummingbird bodies were used for earrings, and at one point, snowy and great egret's feathers were worth more than gold. They estimate nearly 5 million birds a year were hunted for hat purposes, and at one point it got so bad that some birds were near the brink of extinction. And who did they blame? Women, although it was mainly men who profited and hunted the feathers. Fortunately, various conservation groups really fought for it until the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, which protected birds from this fate.
Get ready with me, except it's 350 BCE and I'm about to be a human sacrifice. At least, that's what some historians think. Hi, my name is Ella, and for my final project in my Archaeology of Sacrifice class, I am dressing up as the Huldremose woman. Found in a bog in 1895, the Huldremose woman was wearing some of the best preserved examples that we have of Iron Age clothing. While her nettle or linen tunic has not survived, archaeologists have run chemical analyses on her scarf and skirt to show that the skirt was a bright blue or green and the scarf was a bright red. The plaid pattern is still visible. The scarf was pinned with a bird bone. As you can see, I'm using a rabbit bone because it's a little less delicate and I'm a little less skilled. The skirt was tied up with a leather cord, and she was also wearing 2 spherical amber beads on a woolen cord around her neck. Her finger showed an indent from a ring that was never recovered. People who died in the Iron Age in Denmark were usually cremated, but there are a couple other reasons that the Huldremose woman's death is believed to have been ritual or human sacrifice. Her outfit was very expensive. The fabric shows that it had been dyed in Sweden, and she wore 2 sheepskin cloaks. The inner one was old and patched, as you can see, and it contained a sewn-up pocket with a leather cord, a blue ribbon, and a hair comb. Her second cloak was brand new. Her hair had also been cut off and tied around her neck. She was 40 years old when she died and shows no chemical or physical cause of death. Let me know if you're interested in hearing more about this fascinating woman or how she was discovered. Bye!
Do you know this building? Because you should. It's the Brown Building in New York City, aka home of what used to be the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory on the 8th through 10th floors, owned by these dudes, aka the Shirtwaist Kings. Now, most of the employees were young immigrant women. I'm talking 14 to 20 years old, like these were kids. It was a tight space filled with 500 employees. The factory had 1 working elevator, a weak fire escape, no sprinkler system, and oh yeah, they would lock the doors during work hours to prevent people from fooling around. I mean, what could go wrong? So the shirtwaist was one of the first popular mass-produced articles of clothing in the early 1900s, so the Shirtwaist Kings were making bank, you know what I'm saying? It started out on a normal workday on 1911 until a flame started from a rag bin, which quickly turned into a fire out of control. People rushed to the exits, the doors were locked, so people rushed to the elevator that could only fit 12 people at a time. That broke on the 4th trip. So people rushed to the fire escape. That collapsed too. Firefighters arrived to help and their ladders could only reach the 6th floor, so firefighters set up nets. People leaped and the nets broke. There was no way out and people were trapped, burned alive, or jumped to their deaths. 150 people did end up escaping thanks to these two. No, not these two in the building next door. They attached 2 ladders together and created a path between the 2 buildings. Can you imagine doing that on the 10th floor, walking across a damn ladder? But most weren't so lucky. 146 people died because rich people cared more about efficiency and money than other people's lives. But Ange, did they end up going to jail? Haha, nope. They were charged with manslaughter but pleaded not guilty and actually ended up profiting from this tragedy through insurance. People were outraged and demanded justice. More than 350,000 people marched the streets of Manhattan on 5th Avenue for the victims. Silver lining to all of this though, the fire did lead to the development of labor laws, limits on child labor, better minimum wage, overtime pay, and is a super important part of fashion history.
And if we look closely at her diaries, we'll see that she talks about her best friend figure almost daily. She talks about how beautiful she is, how much time they spend together, and we just really think that this is a testament to how much she loved her friends. These two actually did share a house together with no men on the property, as far as we can tell, and we just like to think that they were just 2 best friend sisters. Our records also indicate there was 1 bed on the premises. The writer was probably an insomniac and didn't use the bed much. Her friend was probably in the bed most of the time, and if the writer did need to sleep, she probably slept out in the barn, because why would 2 women share a bed? They also did share a child together that they adopted from a nearby village. And we just think that they probably raised this child as if they were 2 aunts together. It even appears that they were such close friends that they had a ceremony documenting their love for each other, in which they committed to loving each other as friends until death. And in death that they do reside in a shared grave, not next to each other, but rather in the same coffin. I love friendship.
Something unsurprisingly racist, the history of trespass laws in America. Before enslaved people freed themselves, the only trespass cases were in 1818 and 1820 of a South Carolina landowner suing hunters for being on his land. And the law actually sided with the hunters, saying people had the right to enter private land as long as it didn't cause harm. But after the Civil War, that sentiment changed. They didn't like black people's newfound freedom, so they developed creative ways to re-enslave them, like instating trespass statutes, restricting where they could go, walk, hunt, gather food, and enforcing these statutes in predominantly black areas. In Alabama, trespassing earned you 3 months of hard labor. In Florida, 39 lashes. Other states followed suit, and eventually every southern state passed some type of law restricting access to private land, even for hunting and fishing, which previously the law had no issue with. This even made it hard to spend time with family members who worked on a white person's land, because more often than not, they also lived on that white person's land. So if you went to visit, you could have been persecuted for trespassing. So black people were free, but they couldn't move around freely, couldn't hunt and forage for food freely, couldn't even visit their family and friends freely. And so they found themselves once again tied to white landowners for food, shelter, and employment, and back in a position of enslavement.
First of all, the Greeks were insane. Second of all, that was kind of an exception. You ever heard about, Man-back? Where there was a skeleton that would have been paralyzed in life, curled in the fetal position? Unlike his non-disabled counterparts who were buried straight? Or the ancient baby from Ireland who had Down syndrome and was confirmably cared for and breastfed until he died at 6 months old? Or the young woman's femur that was found close to Kuwait that was visibly different. The growth plates had fused before it should have. And she was buried with relics from a distance. Imported artifact. Also, her teeth were perfect. Unrelated, but her teeth were perfect. She had one single cavity, and other than that, they were flawless. There was an indigenous man found in Wolf Creek who had a clubfoot, and his shoulders showed evidence that he walked with a cane or a crutch. To make a long story short, people have been caring about disabled people for a long, long time.
That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion.
Good day, I'm Bob the Necromancer, and today we're doing an unboxing.